Hello everyone, Mr. John here from Areteem Institute with this week's Thursday Tidbit, where we're going to be talking about aggregating reviews. And we're going to explore two different approaches used by big sites on the internet. To get started here, let's look at the inspiration, right? So various sites, publications, magazines, YouTubers, right, publish reviews for movies, video games, TV shows, all kinds of things like that. We're going to mostly focus on movies here today, but this could work for other mediums as well. And these reviews may be scored, right, using numerical scores, 1 through 10, stars. This got 3 out of 4 stars for the movie, or 2 thumbs up, things like that as well. Maybe a grade, right? The movie got a B or a C or an A plus, or maybe even unscored, right? Some sites just write a written review or do a YouTube video review without some final score at the end. So those would be individual reviews that publications or places or people would be making. Now there's also these aggregator sites. So these are sites then that collect those reviews on one site. So they might share multiple reviews on the same place, but also they typically try to provide one unified score for that movie or video game, etc. Two of the major ones we are going to look at today is Metacritic. So this is one of the famous sites that does TV shows and movies and video games there as well. And the other one we can talk about is Rotten Tomatoes. So that is going to be typically famous for movies in that case. Okay, so these two sites also have different approaches. So that's where we're going to explain some of the math behind those different approaches and explore how that can give us some interesting behavior as well. So the first step for both places is to quantify reviews in some ways, right? Remember we said actual reviews might be stars or a grade or things like that. So the two sites, Metacritic will translate the review into a 0 to 100 number. So we translate that into a 0 to 100 scale there, where Rotten Tomatoes is going to be a binary fresh or rotten, right? And so a couple of things I want to say here. First of all, right, this is somewhat similar to maybe a grading scale, right? You could have a 0 to 100 grade. You could then maybe have a letter grade. That would be a different way of looking at it. You could also think about this as pass-fail. So these types of either binary or numerical systems do crop up in other places that way too. Now, we're not going to talk about it too much here, but I do want to highlight and just mention that this might not be easy. And there's a lot of kind of controversy, or however you want to think about it, with this type of thing as well. For example, if you have a score of A, B, C, D, F on your movie, which of those is fresh? Which of those is rotten? Which of those is, right, what does A mean? Do we use standard school grades on the 0 to 100 scale, or do we have a different scale there, right? One person, 3 stars for one person might mean something different than 3 stars from another person. So all of these things are more complicated than we may see. But we are not really going to be focused on this. So this portion here, right, this could be discussed more in the future, but it's not going to be our focus in this video as well. We're going to be more focused on the step 2, and even from there, with the step 1 being done, some interesting behavior can come up, and we're going to discuss that a little bit today, but then next week as well. So, how do we combine the reviews? So here's where the sites really differ in their approaches. So Metacritic, remember, they put every review on this 0 to 100 scale. And really what they're going to be doing is publishing this average. So they take an average of all of the different reviews. Now, it's maybe a little bit more complicated in reality, so I just want to say that system is not fully explored, right? You might want to do weighted averages. So if I'm a random person posting a movie review on the internet and I have 10 people who read my blog, you might not want to give my review as much stock as, you know, the New York Times movie review or a big newspaper or big magazine. Their movie reviewer might be worth a larger weight, but roughly speaking, they do an average of the different scores they have. So this is kind of like a normal grade in school, right? You get a 0 to 100 percentage based or otherwise like that, and that is what they publish on their site. Now, Rotten Tomatoes, on the other hand, translates everything into this fresh versus rotten, right? So we said they're categorizing each review, whatever it says, it just becomes either fresh, right, fresh tomato, or rotten, rotten tomato, and then they publish the percentage of fresh versus rotten reviews on the site, right? So if you see a 70 on Metacritic, that is going to be telling you the weighted average or average of all of the reviews was about 7 out of 10. If you see a 70 on Rotten Tomatoes, however, that is going to be telling you that 70% of the reviews were fresh, were good in a sense there. So if we go back to the grade analogy, right, the Metacritic is a little bit closer to like a weighted GPA, right? So your GPA, how well you do in each class, it's kind of like a final grade out of 100 for all of your courses put together. But the Rotten Tomatoes is more like how much credit did you get, right? If you did well in a class and passed the class, then it's just a pass. But if you failed the class, you failed, right? It doesn't care how badly you failed. It doesn't care how good you passed the class, right? You either passed or failed each class, and then you get a total amount of credit based on those passes and failures at the end. So let's look at a simple example in this case. And we're going to just ignore, like I said, step 1. So here we're going to assume, and when you do some of the questions for discussion for next week, make these same assumptions. All our reviews are on a scale from 1 to 10 initially, so this is easy to translate into 1 to 100, 0 to 100 there anyway. I guess the lowest score will be, right, 1 if you like, or you can say there's a 0 there as well. And then scores of 6 or above are going to be considered fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. So if you get a 6 out of 10, that's going to be translated as fresh when we are looking at these examples there. So let's look at one with 5 movie reviews. So using these numbers we were just talking about, suppose a movie gets reviews of 8, 5, 8, 5, 8 from 5 different reviewers there. So first of all, let's do the step 1 first. So how is Metacritic going to translate these scores? Well, this one is going to be simple, right? The scores are just all multiplied by 10. So as far as Metacritic is concerned, the scores are going to be 80, 50, alternating there. So we have scores of 80, 50, 80, 50, 80 in that case. For Rotten Tomatoes, on the other hand, these are going to be fresh and rotten. So again, we still have the fresh, 80 is fresh, 5 is rotten. So we have fresh, rotten, fresh, rotten, fresh. And that's all the information we are keeping in that case, right? It doesn't actually matter, and this will be something discussed more in the questions in a second. It doesn't matter if it was an 80 or a 90, 8 or 9 or 10, it's still fresh there. So Metacritic, remember, is publishing the average score in this case. So we have 3 80s, so we have 3 times 80 plus 2 times 50. So we have 240 plus 100, 340. We are dividing by 5, and so we get 68 in this scenario. So our final grade, our final score, however you want to think about this, for Metacritic, if you looked at these reviews published on their site, if these were the only reviews for that movie, 68 would be the final score in that scenario. Now, here, right, we have 3 fresh reviews, and then we would have 5 total reviews. So remember, in this case, what's published is a percentage of the fresh reviews. So 3 of the 5 reviews are fresh, and for Rotten Tomatoes, then a number of 60. 60% would be published on their site. So we have 60% fresh in that case. So those would be the 2 numbers, 68 and 60, relatively close to each other using our example in this scenario. Now, what's interesting about this is that we can actually get more kind of variance in the behavior. So some of the discussion questions to think about for next time, and we'll give some examples here. Just so we have a little bit more room to work, suppose you have 10 movie reviews, still on a 1 to 10 scale, still 6 or above is fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Try to come up with some examples where the final Metacritic score is much higher than the Rotten Tomatoes score. In reverse, try to find examples where the final Rotten Tomatoes score is much higher than the Metacritic score, right? So much higher is a little bit vague, but see if you can figure out kind of the edge cases, what's the maximum or close to the maximum you can do there, and try to think about this a little bit. What are some of the pros and cons of these methods? What might be some scenarios where it's actually possible that we have big differs between the Rotten Tomatoes score and the Metacritic score? What might that mean? And it will somewhat tell you when the Metacritic score might be helpful, when the Rotten Tomatoes score might be helpful, and how you want to think about those 2 ways of aggregating the reviews in practice. That is it for this video. Stay tuned next week, right? Look at that question, take a look, try to figure it out. We'll talk about it more next Thursday. If you have ideas for other subjects or ideas to discuss for future Thursday tidbits, let me know in the comments below. Please like this video, subscribe, follow us if you enjoyed, and I will see everybody next time. Goodbye.